Welcome to Kingdom Now, the podcast featuring faith with an edge, as we celebrate the kingdom of God within you. I'm your host, Dr. Leanne Marino, apostle, author, and theologian, and founder of Spitfire Apostolic Ministries and all the works that go along with it. I'm excited to share this program with you as we explore the ins and outs of counterculture Christianity present as you live out the kingdom of God in your everyday life. Want to learn more? Visit my website at kingdompowernow.org. And now, our program, which features a variety of formats here just for you. Interviews, teaching and preaching proclaimed everywhere from my North Carolina studio to Sanctuary and beyond. And powerful insights here for now as we turn the world upside down everywhere we go. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, happy whatever time of day it is, wherever you are. And to our listeners in Lithuania, we say labas. We hope that whatever time of day it is when you are listening, that you are having a good one. And I welcome you to this edition of the Kingdom Now podcast. And I am your host, Apostle Dr. Leanne Marino, here as the Spitfire, serving as the voice of counterculture Christianity, where we feature the theme of faith with an edge. If you'd like to learn more about the world of counterculture Christianity, feel free to visit my website at kingdompowernow.org. This special episode of Kingdom Now is actually a two-part episode, this being the first part of my Sunday school lesson taught from Metanoia at Sanctuary International Fellowship Tabernacle in Charlotte, North Carolina, titled Money and Stuff in the Bible. We hope that it is a blessing to you. If you would like to learn more about the world of Sanctuary, feel free to visit our website at welcomeinthisplace.org. It is Sunday in March.
March 3rd.
There we go. That sounds great. March 3rd. And we are here with Sunday school. So we are here with our Metanoia program. And I'm doing money and stuff in the Bible. And I'm doing money and stuff because it's so many different assorted things. We got to make it rain for Jesus. Yep, exactly. So, yeah, why not? There we go. Gen Z lingo, right? So actually, and I have this because I was showing this off today and Chuck was kind of drooling over it. And I think you can still get it on Amazon. This is different types of coins of the Bible. And according to what I read, you can actually buy, like you can get like a little sack with a few of them in it, like 5 or 6 of them for like $25, $30. It depends on where you get them from. I actually did think about doing it, but then we're going to be here in time. So maybe for... Well, they're probably not the best of condition. I'm going to say that they're probably not in the best of shape. And so there's, that factor. But money and stuff. So we're going to talk about money and stuff. And so we're going to talk about all this stuff. So now the major part of this is going to be money in Bible times, which is what I wanted to talk about. But the problem with talking about money in Bible times is that there's a lot that's not known. Who would have thought, right? And so we're going to talk about that, but then we're going to talk about basically what people did with their money for the Lord in biblical times. And this was actually a bit of a head spinner. It took me a long time to figure it, some of it out, trying to sort out the different types of tithes and offerings, and that there's actually, according to some people, more than one tithe. And, I was trying to figure all this out. So for those who want to read more, you can check out my book, My Money Has a Mission, actually, which I think after doing this deserves a little bit of an update. I mean, it may not get as much of an update as some other things, and stop grinning, Nick. But I think that some of what I discuss in here merits an update in the book, and so it kind of belongs in there. So let's talk about money in Bible times. Okay. So, what was money like? Okay. So you did the singing. That was right.
Metal, I would assume.
Well, actually, no. It did. But the oldest form of money is based in the medium of exchange.
Oh, it's a barter system.
Exactly. But that there's two types of that. So there's goods and services And then there's credit or debit. And actually, crediting and debiting also did exist in biblical times. But money existed prior to written history, which is why we don't really know anything about it in Bible times or what they did. But that the earliest history is trade, was most likely, hey, I have this, name a thing, camel, goat. Okay. I have this camel and you have a goat. And I need a goat. And you need a camel. But a camel is worth more than a goat. So you add something to your goat, like 2 goats. Okay. They're great. I was going to think of another animal, but okay. You think of another goat. So you're going to give me 2 goats for my 1 camel and we're going to trade. And so think about that concept though, because that actually does kind of establish value and worth and price and all that sort of thing. And so people would exchange different things of different value, and they would do that with the basic intent of giving something that was needed. And so probably the oldest thing that they used were shells, according to what I read. And actually, I remember reading a thing that we get the term salary from salarium, which is because the Romans paid their soldiers sometimes in salt. And so there's a lot of different ways that people got paid. The salt of the earth. Now you can see why salt was so kind of relevant, and it did a lot of things, isn't it? No, then they would trade with it because it had a very high value. Yeah.
That's like probably people in ancient times would look at us weird because they're like, you're trading paper.
Well, they did trade with paper. Actually, the evolution of banknotes or of like that kind of thing, a note, is actually older than coins from what I found when I read it. Like I said, this was all very, very interesting. And then there's what we might call money of account, which is credit and debit or goods of services, as well as the evolution of money exchange in the tangible, literal form. And there are varying reports, but accounting practices with money date from 30,000 years ago, because there's some thing it might have gone on somewhere in Europe or in Africa, to around 7,000 years ago, where there's definitive history of currency, which was in Mesopotamia. And as those of you who study different cultures and the evolution of civilization in school, what did we learn? That one of the first marks of a civilization was that they had some sort of a form of currency. So that goes back then. But I would say that the evolution of money is conjecture, because we really don't we can kind of guess, and the barter system, hey, my camel for 2 of your goats, something like that does seem to be viable, but we're not really sure.
They probably didn't write stuff down on a daily basis.
Right, and because it was something that was so common, who really thought about it. It's like marriage in the Bible. And I know that people are probably going to wonder where I went with that. And I'm going to go exactly where they think I'm going to go. It was so customary and it was so common that they didn't write down what defined marriage or how it was.
They were thinking of the future paleontologists and archaeologists who were going to be like, we don't know anything about these cultures.
Right.
It would have been helpful to know what was here.
Exactly. They weren't going to be kind of on that level, I guess would be the way to put it. They didn't think, gee, people are going to wonder what we did. They were just kind of living every day. So the first money was representative, and it does predate coinage. And I think that this is kind of an interesting thing. So representative money is something that represents something else. So like a dollar bill is representative money. It represents a certain amount, but it really doesn't have that amount itself. Like it doesn't cost $1 to make $1. So it's a representative form. But the first forms were found in Babylon, obviously. So, notice that thing. Egypt, China, and India. They had what they called clay, basically a clay token that they used in temples and they used in warehouses. And it was representative of money, so people could go and claim something or could get something, and they could have a service in the temple. Yeah, yes. This is in an anime or something, isn't it?
No.
Yeah. Okay, that would be ante. Yeah. Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
that's exactly how it is. I figured that somebody did something in One Piece or something like that.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I mean, they do have poker kind of games, or like a gambling game.
Okay. And I was thinking that because there is a lot of representative stuff in One Piece, and so that would have made sense. And like, this is in One Piece, but no. Okay. I was close.
Surprisingly thinking of the game.
Really? Yeah. So that's the same thing. It's like a poker ante. It's like the pot, and you have the chips, and the chips represent. I think some blue are like $5, and then you've got red or so much, and people kind of put it all in there, and then they represent different amounts. That's exactly the concept. But if you go to representative money and you look at that concept, you still do see it in certain temples today. So, like for example, if you go to the Hindu temple with a really, really, really long name, whatever that road is that goes into Cary, that connects Morrisville to Cary. It's Chapel Hill Road. It's Chapel Hill Road. Okay, there we go. That big, huge white temple that's got a really long name that I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce. They have representative money. And so you pay so much money and they give you so many tokens and you're able to get so many sticks of incense or sesame oil or something to burn in front of one of their deities in one of the lesser temples there, because there are I think 3 temples on that property, and so there's also a lesser temple, and so representative money in this context is still used today.
So money was essentially created because, well, currency was created for religion.
Exactly. And I think that that's an interesting thing that we're actually going to talk about, because when I thought about that and when I picked up on that and I thought about the relevance of religion in so many things, like basically we did that whole thing on time once, and we were talking about how basically calendars and times and seasons and dividing up of time is basically a religious thing. It had to do with religious festivals and stuff of that nature. And now we learn money was as well, because it had to do with whatever was given. Or I would say the reason why it has a religious connotation is because religious institutions were probably among the first that had the ability to buy currency and trade currency in a different form. You could not walk in. It's like I use this example with tithing today. Okay, I love you all, but do not bring me a bushel of wheat because I'm not going to know what to do with it. And that people who worked in the temples weren't agrarian in the same way as everybody else because they worked the temples. So they needed people to bring them food, and God had to teach them how to barbecue because they had to take the first part of the offering for themselves because they didn't know how to do any of that themselves. This was not the culture that they lived in. And so religious institutions had the need for currency. They had the need for, hey, you're bringing me something. Okay, now we're out of candles. We need to go and get those from a merchant or from somebody who does it, and they have to be paid for their materials. Or we need to have garments made. Now, in the Old Testament, like if you read in Exodus, it says, all right, bring everybody in and they'll bring all the stuff. And so it's the same type of concept, but then you've got that people brought the wrong stuff. Or maybe we didn't have the right color, or maybe we didn't have the right thing at that particular time in history. And so currency was needed for that. And it also says that they were also used in palaces. So the government also would have needed currency. They did not necessarily need a bushel of wheat on their doorstep or a bunch of corn. What are they going to do with that? They had to be able to transport whatever they were using. They had to be able to convert it into different things. And so that's kind of how this worked. They had need for it. So they probably did not trade money this early, but they used it within these contexts. And I'm going to say that I want to say they used to do it. I don't know if they still do it now, but in some Catholic churches, particularly in Europe, or they used to have candle rooms, which a lot of them do not have anymore because of insurance and because, like, somebody tried to set the one we had on fire when I was a kid. What they used to do is you would put in a quarter and it would give you a token or something, and maybe you were able to go into an event, or maybe you were able to light a candle, but in order to do that you had to put the token in. There was all these different kind of things connected with it. Yes.
I was gonna say it sounds like an arcade.
I
And
was
you can kind of play a game
yeah.
where you get to buy tokens, you put tokens in the game, and then you get tickets, and then you can.
Yeah, exactly. So that's representative money. Yep. Arcade tokens, Chuck E. Cheese. I was thinking of like if you go to I was going to put the modern equivalent is okay, we go to a concert and they stamp your hand. So it's not really currency, but it is representative that you did pay. So it's, or like they give you a bracelet that you're over 18. If you're a minor, right? Or if you didn't have your ID, like they did that when we went to that one, and I'm like, it is cold out here. I'm not going back to get my ID, and I don't want alcohol anyway. But it's the same type of thing. They're representative of different things, and it tells us the necessity of currency evolved through religion and government, not through trade. So that is kind of cool. So coinage comes from like fragments, so little pieces of metal that had a certain value based on what they had. So like a 50th of an ounce of gold or a 50th of an ounce of silver had a certain value. And so that was the concept of coins. And that was used in barter and money. And there, how barter evolved into money was that we traded metals and we traded stuff of that nature. So the Romans used bronze, for example, in that type of context. So money in the Bible. Well, where do we see money in Scripture and why? This was probably the most interesting part of it. The first incidence of money in the Bible is Genesis 17:13. Whether born in your household or bought with your money, they must be circumcised. My covenant in your flesh is to be an everlasting covenant. So they're talking about circumcision, but they were talking about buying slaves. That was the first incident. So, under the covenant of circumcision and about purchasing a slave, and no matter how Abram obtained that slave, whether inherited or purchased, they all had to be circumcised. So that's a whole other interesting thing about body autonomy and, that kind of context. But that was the first example. And the first commercial transaction in the Bible was in Genesis 23. And it's Abraham purchased a cave and a field in order to bury his wife. So life and death, pretty much. Buying them in life, buying them in death, pretty much. And so most financial transactions, especially in early biblical history, were through exchange goods such as crops or herds. That would probably be the majority of it. But the thing I found interesting about Genesis 23 is it documents an entire negotiation for the land. And it's one of those parts of Scripture that you kind of most likely would breeze over because it's like, all right, Sarah's daddy bought the plot. That's the long and the short of it. But they actually wanted to give him the land for free, but he refused. And the reason for that, he wanted to pay the full value of the property because according to certain texts, apparently what he paid was 400 silver shekels. So that was a common amount for Canaanite real estate transactions. And so that confirmed the account. But the reason why he would have wanted to hold on to it was because that meant somebody else couldn't come at some point in time and move the body. So if they owned it, that was going to stay there like that in perpetuity until somebody else came along and moved it or did whatever.
Dangle that over his head, like, oh, you got this for free from us. Now you gotta do a favor.
Right, exactly. Of sorts, yeah, or like buying a plot. Yeah, I mean, it was a lot bigger than a plot, but yeah, like buying a plot. It was a cave, and I guess there was a field. And he actually bought the whole thing. And that was what was interesting. So this actually really does confirm ancient Canaanite practice. And so he also played by their rules, even though maybe he was, called to be something else. He still interacted with the world in the language of their transactions. And so I think that was interesting. Yes, Nick, you look like you're having a thought.
Because he even did the whole thing where it's like, give the people what it ceases. So he abided by his brother-in-law.
Pretty much. Yeah. Like you say, the way that they do it. Notice that, and that would be an interesting thing to talk about, like the greater concept of submission to authority and about living within culture, and you're getting this whole grin on your face because it's a way. It's a way that we interact with society. And technically, anytime we buy or we sell something for a price, it's an act of submission because it's part of the greater society in which we live. I mean, I could go in places and we could try and negotiate, or we could try and barter, but the price is the price. This is America. So, yeah, right. I mean, sometimes people do give them for nonprofits, but not a lot of the time. So, it really does show, like you're saying, that it's a way we engage with culture. And a lot of people are trying not to do that, but that is a whole other message. The submission thing, yeah, that they're taking a whole different switch on it. That's not really right. Okay. So money in the New Testament, gold and silver were very common as currency in biblical times. In fact, silver was the most common. So all of these different coins that for the most part are pictured here would have been silver in biblical times, and they would have actually been minted out of silver, and they would have been used for different purposes therein. And so there are different coins. So the talent, we have the mina, the selah, shekel, dinar, Perta, and the lepton. And in the temple, worshipers used the money exchange. Now, this is kind of important because this is a whole different context than people are using it today. So they used money exchange services. So who's been in an airport? Did you use, when you went overseas, did you go to the little currency place?
Yes.
Okay, you did. And so you've been with a money changer.
Technically, I don't remember anything about it.
Well, I don't expect you to remember anything about it because it really wasn't that exciting. But, you've been in a money changer office. So what you did was you went there to have them convert your money to your euros or whatever was the currency when you went, or wherever you went. I'm assuming it was the euro.
Yeah, I think it was also.
Oh, was it?
Kind of like an
Okay. When I went, there was a person. There was a person that actually went and did it based on the daily value. And the reason why I mentioned that is because I went to Europe and I got all this money, and then I came back and it was like, oh, there was like nothing there because the dollar value is higher than the euro. I think I even kept the coins because it was not worth going and trying to screw with it. They would only do dollars. But the money changers would change the base common currency that they went in with to a silver shekel, because that was the only currency that they would accept in the temple. They wouldn't accept any other money, and it had to be Jewish or Tyrian, and so that's Tyre, that would be modern day Lebanon. They had to go and they had to do it that way. And so then they would go and take those shekels and they would buy the animals for sacrifice, such as a pigeon or a lamb for whatever was going to happen the next day. So people continued to pay for things through the exchange on different things. So they would only accept that particular form of currency. So they had to basically convert everything into that. But they might have also tithed on crops or on the amount generated from a crop, which is probably more likely. And we will talk about that in a minute. So the reason why this is important is because this whole type of thing, when Jesus went in and he cast everybody out of the church, the temple wasn't a church, but he cast everybody out of the temple, was not the same as saying, hey, we have a guest speaker today and they've got books out on the table out there, and if anybody wants to go buy one, you can. And there's a lot of people, you can't do that, that's selling in the temple. It's not selling in the temple. First of all, we're not in a temple. Second of all, these people had to do this if they wanted to perform the services under the law. And the money changers were gouging them. So in other words, they were charging outrageous fees because they knew they had to do this.
The original perfect.
Basically, yeah, they knew that they had to do this in order to do the services. Now, if you don't want a book on the table, nobody's making you go buy the book on the table. It don't have nothing to do with it. But the context is very, very different. And so when people start on things, it's not having a bookstore in your church. It's not having a table at the end of service. But it was an example of, hey, like for example, you can't come to this church if you don't pay this amount of money. That would kind of be the modern equivalent. I saw you, Ned. Yes.
So is Selah here different than the other
Yeah,
concept?
Selah is a word, and it we don't actually really know what it meant, but it was a musical notation, and they often kind of say it was a pause, like, so be it. Yeah, that's not money. This is a different. This is a currency. It is different.
How does that, I guess, how does, I don't know if you know, but like,
Well, because the other one's not money. This is just for some reason why they called it that, and that I don't know. I had actually never heard of that before I did this thing, so I didn't really look much into the specific forms, but yeah. I will look more into it because I was kind of curious about it, but yeah, for the sake of this not being 5 hours long, I didn't go looking, didn't go diving, and here are all the coins, and here's what all the coins mean. Nobody's so interested. It, it was interesting. It was interesting. So these are New Testament coins. So you've got the lepton was the widow's mite, and it was the smallest fraction, and it is issued by Judea, Greek-speaking Judea, under the Roman Empire. Basically, yeah, 1/100th of official currency. It was basically like a penny, and it was made out of bronze. So then you had the tribute penny, which is the denarius, which is issued by Rome under the Emperor Tiberius. And it was equivalent to like 1 day's labor. So it would be roughly like $75 today. Isn't that awful? Yeah, that's 1 day's labor today. Anyway, and it was made out of silver. So so the Tyrian shekel is from Tyre, which is Lebanon, and that was like the equivalent of 2 days' labor. So that would be like $150. And it was 94% plus silver. It was much purer silver than the Roman minting for whatever reason. So it had a higher value. Yes. So the tribute penny was in tribute to the emperor who was on it. Thus, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. That's the coin that was used.
But dang, they really were just like, okay, a day's labor. Not
Yeah.
even like
Right.
10% or whatever.
Well,
It's like a day's labor. Like,
Remember that
that's a lot.
story with the guys and the laborers, and the people were there, and then some people came in the afternoon and they all got the same because you were only paid, you weren't paid by the hour, and then everybody was mad. Yeah, everybody was mad. So, and then the shekel was the coin in the fish's mouth that they used to pay the temple tax, in that really unusual story.
They found literally the temple shekel
Yeah,
in the fish's mouth.
in the fish's mouth.
So they could only use it for the temple.
Well, right, yeah. I mean, you could probably use it if you were in Lebanon. I don't know if they took it in Rome. I'm not sure about that, but it doesn't sound like it. If they were converting it, I guess the more than likely thing is most people probably didn't have it. Most people didn't have it lying around. So it's like 2 drachma, which I mean doesn't mean anything to any of us. Yeah, it would be kind of like about that. Yeah, pretty much. Well, because they were this huge intersection of stuff. And it's also most likely the payment made to Judas Iscariot. So now that has a whole other meaning to it when you go look that up. And it was most likely had the head of Baal on it.
Wow, the idolatry is like.
I know, like knowing that, I went,
wow.
Yeah. So I was quite taken.
Very on the nose.
Very on the nose. Doesn't miss any kind of thing. So why does God want our money? Isn't that the first question everybody asks when you start talking about tithes and offerings and stuff like that? Well, God doesn't need my money. Well, funny you should say that. So from the earliest of history, spiritual operations cost money. Everything costs money, right? So, right, everything costs money. So the concept of this I find in Haggai 2:8, which is actually a book about rebuilding the temple, because everybody was so busy taking care of themselves, they didn't do that. So what does he say? The silver is mine and the gold is mine, declares the Lord Almighty. So giving for spiritual purposes recognizes the idea of tribute. Okay, now we today use the term oh, it's a tribute, someone's doing a tribute. But tribute is something given or contributed voluntarily as due or deserved. That's what the actual term
Like in
means.
the Hunger Games, when Katniss is like, I volunteer as tribute, taking her sister's place.
Exactly. That's tribute. So when we're giving to spiritual purposes, we're paying tribute. It's an older term and it's an older concept that apparently they brought back in the Hunger Games. Yes, Nick. Of sorts, yes.
Sounds like a substitute.
Kind of, yeah. It's like an offering for
Yeah.
the easiest kind of way to explain it, but it's returning a portion of what we have to acknowledge that God is the reason that we have any of it. So it's like taxes are a form of governmental tribute. As much as we hate them, they are. That's the concept of tribute, is that, in other words, render unto Caesar what's Caesar's, give to Caesar what's Caesar's. And so we give to God what's God's, and that's tribute. And the idea of tribute is found throughout ancient religion. It's only in modern times that everything is about us all the time. I mean, and we can see that human nature is still human nature and people still made everything about them. But the idea that, like I saw a post online today, and I did put up a nice little paragraph about it, as snide as I could. Someone said, block me and block the blessings of God. And I was just like, okay, don't we think a lot of ourselves? But, this self-centeredness disguised as spirituality is annoying. But, it's not that God needs our money. It's that we need to acknowledge him financially. So the Bible says, and I think that the verse comes up somewhere else, that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And so what we spend our money on says a lot about us. So I'm going to use you as the example because I can think of you as the best example. Actually, I could get Chuck too, but you as the example, you like your Funko Pops. And no, this is not a criticism. It's not. I'm not saying that they're an idol. I'm not saying that they're a problem. I don't mean it in that context, but you have a lot of them, so you have spent a lot of money on them over the years, and so that's something that's important to you. But I think it's more what they represent. They represent characters and shows, and they represent plot lines and stories and things that are meaningful to you. Like you have a million Stitch figures and stuffed toys. You like Lilo and Stitch, but you like the story that Lilo and Stitch inspires. So, like you and your Pacific Rim obsession, okay? I even made the joke, and I was like, Nick, if you need us this weekend, it's fine. We could interrupt Chuck watching Pacific Rim again, and and I made a joke about it. But it's what the story represents to you. So it's still the same concept of representative of something, that what you're willing to buy the Blu-ray and the disc and the figurines, if they ever have any, and the posters, and because the fanzines, and you bought a whole thing when there was the anniversary. It's representative of something to you that's important to you. And we might tease you about it, like we tease you sometimes, but it's something that's very, very important or means something. So that tells us what's important to you. And if we look at people's money and people's attitudes, it tells us a lot about what's important to them. And so that's relevant to this because while we're down here, operating spiritual institutions costs money. It costs a lot of money, and we don't get deals and stuff. It's like in other countries that are supposedly more oppressive than our own, they can go have open air meetings and get stuff for free. We do that here. We got to find people to pay. We can't just go to downtown Charlotte and do whatever we want. It doesn't work like that. I mean, I even assume that some of those groups like Jehovah's Witnesses, they actually set up stuff. They've got to have permission to do that. Or like the Hebrew Israelites that scream at everybody as they walk by. I mean, they have got to have some sort of authorization to be taking up all that public space in order to do it. So stuff costs money. The electricity, the water, the internet, the cleaning supplies, the Bibles, the software. Everything costs money because it doesn't fall out of the sky. I wish it did. I feel though like we treat church like it's not down here. And that's where I think the submission thing that you were talking about is kind of relevant, because we act like we're not doing church in the world. We act like we're doing it on a cloud somewhere, where everything is free and nobody has any titles and all the elves and the fairies take care of people. It's not like that. And while we're down here, if we're trying to impact the world, that means that we have to deal with and sometimes do things the way that they do them in the world. So, I mean, it's easy to me. The things that we do down here, they're not incorruptible. We have to replace stuff. So it's God's provision that leadership should be devoted to the work exclusively. Now, I understand that maybe that's not practical because everything costs so much money now. And it does demand, though, that somebody takes care of those services, that those services are provided for. And while we're down here, exchange of goods and services is still a thing. To me, it's not hard, but I don't know. We make a lot out of it. But it's God's desire that his children don't lack. So giving is required to maintain operation in this world. So the idea of material goods or crops used as currency. So why didn't God always specify money?
Not so much like God is God.
Right. Exactly. Right.
It like God asked us of them before money.
Really? Yeah. No, well, that is true too. I mean, it was and it wasn't, but yeah. So Bible times were agrarian in nature. That means that they had crops. That means that they farmed. I don't know. It wasn't farming like farming today, like this mass production. It was more,
They let the
hey,
land lie fallow for the seventh year.
the
like
seventh
it's
year.
in the book.
Well, but that's also, so now you think about all this stuff, okay? That was tribute. In other words, every seventh year they gave the land back to God and they let the land rest. A lot of these concepts are very, very biblical, and we keep missing them because we're reading it like now. I mean, you think about what would happen if we just canceled all the debts once every 50 years and we let the land lie.
We didn't charge people interest on loans.
So they were dependent on farming to live. So, maybe somebody had a few acres and they grew what they could. And you also have to consider, given that this is biblical times, they didn't have farm machinery. They didn't have, I mean, they might have had some tools, but they didn't have a plow. And, like, it was time consuming and the land was hard to work. It wasn't like, weather was not predictable. They didn't have meteorologists, not that they help much a lot of the time. No, I mean, I don't even think that they had like glass and stuff. I mean, they must have had glass, but they didn't have like windows, like you're talking about a greenhouse. Yeah, they wouldn't have that.
Like the climate was.
The climate was the control, and they couldn't control things like droughts and floods and famines and blight, insects. Yeah, like that. Right, locusts. If they had a locust invasion, they were done, and it wasn't like now where, oh, okay, the lettuce has a blight, right? Wasn't there something with the lettuce? We're just going to raise the prices. We're just going to make lettuce $6 a head. They didn't have that economy at the time. They didn't have that. So they just didn't have stuff. And so their diets were dependent on what was available. And that depended a lot on the conditions. And so most of the Bible tithes, sacrifices, and offerings were given in the form of crops and herds and products like wool, wine, fruit, that type of thing. Olive oil was a big one that's actually mentioned. And many of the offerings were derivative of these things. So, like, for example, a grain offering didn't just include burning grain, they threw incense on there. Now, the average person, I don't know a lot about the history of incense. I mean, I'm just going to say that up front. It's not something I've ever really read about, but I'm assuming that somebody didn't just have all the stuff to do that because it involves spices. So I don't know how much the average person had in that vein. So, you know, they had to get that from somewhere. So they had to do that. But the crops were more functional for handling because of the ancient currency system. Like I said, I can't take 20 ears of corn and go pay my cell phone bill. I can't call up Google Fi. Yeah, you can just see that, right? And go, hey, I don't have any money this month, but I have 20 ears of corn. Will you take it in exchange? That's going to be a no. That's going to be a really, really heavy no. And it's akin to the idea, have you ever heard of pounding? I had asked Nick about it, but I didn't, because I heard a church.
No, can you explain a little bit more?
Sure. So I heard of it first in African American churches, which is why I asked Nick if they'd ever heard of it. So it's from the tradition that instead of maybe bringing people money, like bringing a church leader money, you bring a pound of flour or you bring food. Okay, so they didn't do that.
I was thinking several things before that, and I was like, no.
Okay, so pounding, it's
Like,
kind of,
is it like a sacrificial beating? Like, what is
no, it's kind of, well, it's not a beating, but it's called a pounding because the members of the church give dry goods or sugar or flour, or those are the traditional idea of pounding. Now, I have heard of them where they might have done it in the leader told people what to bring. And I'm actually very much in favor of that because we would get all this stuff we don't want. So like, for example, stuff, right? So like, I mean, they specified what kind of grape juice they wanted and what kind of flour that they wanted. And it was Welch's. And what kind of apple juice, like they wanted Mott's or, paper towels or, stuff of that nature. And so it was kind of a way, I guess we could say, to pay tribute to a leader. And it's like I had said, I kind of like that idea better than I have been to birthday services in churches where the building is about ready to fall down and they're bringing the leader hats. Oh, I didn't even see that. I mean, but like they bought her hats, like, and I don't mean like a hat. I mean like a hat, like a church hat, like it looks like a flying saucer landed on her head hat. Amp that up a little bit. So yeah, like the Kentucky Derby hats, exactly, but plus. So yeah, that would be the concept of it. I said I kind of like that idea better than bringing $1,000 worth of stuff we don't really need. I think it's actually kind of a nice idea, but it's kind of like pounding. That would be the kind of concept because the Levites ate most of what they brought. So basically, God said, hey, bring all this stuff in, and then them and their families often ate most of it, or at least a part of it. Pretty much, yeah. I have a book I haven't finished on them and kind of looking at how they were handled versus now. And maybe if we use some of these older concepts in our leadership now, we would get rid of some of the issues that we have, but that's a whole other thing. So work of all sorts. And I think that this is also goes back to the crop thing. Work is a holy thing. I mean, I understand that none of us really like it or want to do it, especially maybe for the people that we do it for. But, it says that Adam was put in the garden to tend the garden, and that was before the fall. So work and doing work is a holy thing before God. It is a sacred thing. And so to bring the commission of what we've got from work before God is a part of that whole process. It's a part of that whole tribute. Because what God has basically put us here and what we do by his ability and by his grace and by his power. And so offering that back is still part of this tribute cycle.
Thank you for joining us on Kingdom Now. I pray it proves to be a blessing in your life. To learn more about this work, ask a question, submit feedback or a topic suggestion, advertise on air, or donate to this work, visit my website, which contains essential information and links for other points of contact around the web at kingdompowernow.org. Also, if you are in our area and would like to visit Sanctuary International Fellowship Tabernacle SIFT, visit welcomethisplace.org. Until next time, this is Apostle Dr. Leanne Marino reminding you that the kingdom of God is within you, and that means the kingdom is now.